what are the divisions? Now, there are two things. One is Europe has one set of a different approach from the United States. In fact, it would be a good idea to take up the narrative from one or the other of the two points of departure I have in mind. We could actually start from when the Russians and when Lavrov actually got the Americans off the hook in Syria by bringing out getting the regime to surrender its chemical weapons, and that became the excuse for not rushing into war, which in retrospect now seems would have been a disaster. Now, everything then Geneva took place, and what started to go wrong, very briefly?
I think everything started when the so-called government in Kyiv came to power. That was the beginning. And you know, one day on the 20th...
No, but why would they do that? The script is going like
but
this.
That is on the 21st February. The rebels, so-called rebels, signed an agreement with then very much in force Ukrainian President Yanukovych.
Yes.
On the 21st, they do it in the presence of Poland, Germany, and
France.
France, yes.
Yes.
And they signed an agreement to finish, to quieten down the Maidan in Kyiv. They have done it, but the next morning, that agreement was just scrapped like toilet paper, thrown out, and not respected by those sides because...
Yes.
And they toppled the president immediately. What is then the cost? What is the worth of their signature?
What we have covered,
that is what gave signal.
Sasha, you were talking about the agreement which was signed and then it was repudiated. About that time, the American Deputy Secretary of State from the State Department, Victoria Nuland, turned up. And she used a certain unmentionable term. If I use that word on this program, I'm sure it will be censored. She used a 4-letter word for the European Union.
Yeah.
What was the tension between the Americans and the Europeans at that stage?
I think we have to ask Victoria Nuland. She
Prabhat.
was, you know, I don't know, she was distributing croissants in Maidan, just keeping a big heap of croissants in her, well, somewhere in a bag, and just giving it to the people, you know. But
I'll give you a speculative answer, and I'm using the word speculative only because it's better to use it. The conversation that you're referring to dates to the 12th of February.
Correct.
Okay? And she was speaking to the US ambassador in Kyiv. And there, you know, apart from the colorful language, which is very telling, I'm glad you were focused on it. The other thing was that she discusses certain personnel issues, right? And she says that Klitschko is not the right person.
The boxer,
and she says the heavyweight boxing champion. And she says Yatsenyuk is the right man. Now, this is of course before the agreement was signed. Now, as soon as the agreement was signed, now here is one more leak which is worth blending into the narrative, which was that the Estonian foreign minister, speaking to Catherine Ashton, tells her that the firing that broke out on the Maidan was actually done by the protesters. Now, this is
the
something
sharpshooters
which has been kept away from the public gaze. What happened was that because of that shooting, 80 people died, which in Ukraine, which in any country is a large number, but especially in the context of Ukraine, it was a very large number. And then the message was out that time's up for Yanukovych. Now, the Europeans were pushing for a gradual agreement so that Yanukovych would stay, certain constitutional changes would first follow, and then a pre-term presidential election would take place.
And the date was fixed.
No later than December 2014. This is what was overturned by the shooting. And not by coincidence, Klitschko is out but backing from the outside, and Yatsenyuk is the prime minister, and in the role that that conversation had in mind for him.
Yes.
So this was the root of the differences between the United States and the EU.
Now, when differences erupt like this, Prabhat, we know that they are deep. I mean, there are contradictions between Germany and the United States, and you, from your vantage point in Moscow, just reflect. I mean, they are there.
Yes.
Will you dilate on that? Because Sasha wants to steer clear. He just wants to go for the Americans and not the Europeans at this point.
Okay, look, I think the starting point would have to be, firstly, unraveling, if you like, the different strands within the EU itself.
Yes.
If you won't take my word for it, take Rumsfeld's word for
Yes.
it. There's an old Europe and there's a new Europe.
Yes.
I think the new Europe is much more anti-Russian. It was steeped in anti-Sovietism. In fact, its birth took place in an anti-Soviet context, and that has been transferred into anti-Russianism. Old Europe understands, because they have lived through a very different kind of historical experience. It was Alexander I who said, we have now shown that you can't get from Paris to Moscow, but you can get from Moscow to Paris. And he said this in Paris. So, you know, they understand that there is a point
and it
beyond.
happened exactly.
And that's exactly what
200
happened.
years ago.
Yeah, that's right. And then it happened again a little shorter while back, only it wasn't Paris but Berlin. So, you know, Paris and Berlin have an understanding of just how far you can try to isolate and bottle up and push Russia. Elsewhere, there is a different kind of strategy. Number one. Now, the big question, really, you know, when the Georgian war happened, Sarkozy was the president of France, and Sarkozy had good relations with all sides, and so he was able to play a mediatory role. Unfortunately, Hollande doesn't have that same kind of equation with the Russian leadership. I think Merkel could build that kind of relationship, but the Germans still have that baggage of the past. If they were to strike out on their own today, I have a feeling that at least in some sections of the European Union, there would be awkward questions about just what is going on. And the word that's always thrown at Germany is Sonderweg. Are they branching out on their own?
Always.
And I think this is something which they don't want to face and will not face. So I guess this is going to fester for a while. I just want to add one more thing, which is that, you know,
Sasha is raising his hand there.
All right, I yield to. I yield.
No, I would like to return.
We'll come back to this.
I want to return to the Europeans, as you say. After the Crimean referendum and its reunification with Mother Russia, you know, we are still, I cannot answer this question for myself. How come when after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Germany was reunified, it was quite all right, it was wonderful.
Yes.
And to get that reunification, they were promising us honey and, you know, everything. And we shall not move to the borders of the Soviet Union. They were ready, even as Chancellor told Gorbachev in the Caucasus, that they were even almost ready for the neutral status of Germany. And I can't understand. On the one hand, reunified Germany is very fine. But reunified Crimea, reunified with Russia, it is very bad. Though not a single person died. Unlike now, that the Kyiv authorities have brought arms and tanks and planes against Russian population of eastern and southern regions.
Ambassador, they accuse you of wanting to upturn the new Kyiv, new Ukraine, you want to disrupt what they call New Ukraine. New Ukraine, Prabhat. What is that? You were talking about New Europe.
Well, I should mention this on a personal note. Mine is the first official footprint on Ukrainian soil, on the soil of independent Ukraine. Yeah. I opened the embassy there.
I'll tell you something. I'll just this is so interesting. Today, the war between the East and the West is not ideological, which the Cold War was. But there is a situation which is hotting up. Very briefly, do you think there is an occasion to at least contemplate some kind of a derivative of a smart non-alignment, some kind of an equidistant group? Sasha, what do you say?
Well, I think the voting in the United Nations General Assembly has shown and has reminded me of the golden days of non-alignment, because half the members of the General Assembly abstained or didn't vote. It means that there is a growing movement which is gaining force of those countries who do not want to have unipolar world order. And we also highly value, of course, India's position as regards the Crimean events and the events in the Ukraine. And it was specially mentioned and underlined by President Putin. He singled out India and China and thanked for the very well-balanced, wise, and objective approach to the
UN, both India and China.
To the events.
Prabhat, on this non-aligned idea, some kind of a smart non-alignment, that is the term being used.
Well, I heard you use the word derivative, and that frightened me a bit, because derivatives have played merry hell into the world economy. So we don't want any derivatives around. But look, I don't know if you want non-aligned in that sense, because I mean it has a certain historical resonance. But yes, certainly, I believe that India particularly, and I hope this happens once we get a new government, has nothing at all to gain and everything to lose in growing tensions between Russia and America. And I think the big danger is that the more the West squeezes Russia, the more Russia is forced to lean on China, which they are not themselves comfortable doing, and which is certainly not in our interest. So I think that is where I would...
We will lean on our brother and sister India.
Well,
that's where we shall lean.
That was very well said, Prabhat. Thank you very much, Ambassador Kadakin. Thank you very much, Ambassador Shukla. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And we shall revert another day with a different program. Let us see where the situation in Ukraine takes us. It is at this particular juncture, the situation as I see it as follows. The West does not want a resurgent Russia. Russia does not want to be circumscribed. How do we get from here? On another program sometime. Good night and goodbye.